Now I have enough source material to write the full script. Let me produce it. Russia fired 690 aerial weapons at Ukraine in a single night. 90 missiles, 600 drones, and one of those missiles was the Oreshnik. Not just any warhead, a nuclear-capable hypersonic ballistic missile traveling at more than 10 times the speed of sound, deployed in combat for only the third time in this entire war. That's not a routine barrage. That's Putin holding up a weapon the Kremlin has specifically advertised as uninterceptable and saying, "Watch what I'm prepared to do." It's May 29th, 2026, and what happened 5 days ago in the skies over Ukraine may be one of the most consequential escalations this conflict has seen, and almost nobody outside of geopolitical circles is treating it that way. This is Professor David. Subscribe if you want to stay ahead of what's actually moving this world. And let's get into exactly why this matters far beyond Ukraine's borders. Russia launched 90 missiles and 600 drones in a single overnight assault. Zelensky confirmed the Oreshnik struck Belets, a city of 200,000 people, roughly 40 miles from the edge of Kyiv itself. Think about that geographically. This weapon hit a civilian population center that close to the capital, not a military installation on the front line, not a facility deep in occupied territory, a city. And when Zelensky responded, he didn't just speak to his own people, he addressed the United States directly. "It's important that this does not remain without consequences for Russia," he said. "Decisions are needed, from the United States, from Europe, and others." That sentence is doing enormous work. Zelensky is essentially signaling that the existing framework, the Western response architecture, the pace of aid decisions, the American posture under the Trump administration, is no longer sufficient. That what just happened requires something different. Whether anyone listens is another matter entirely. Now here's what most coverage missed in the immediate aftermath. The Russian Defense Ministry framed this strike as retaliation. Putin ordered the bombardment in response to what he described as a Ukrainian attack on a college dormitory in Starobilsk, a Russian-occupied town in eastern Luhansk. Ukraine disputed this entirely, saying it only targeted military facilities. Let that framing sit for a second. Russia fires 690 weapons, including a hypersonic nuclear-capable missile, at a Ukrainian city of 200,000 people, killing 4 civilians, wounding over 60, hitting apartment buildings, schools, and a museum. Zelensky told Al Jazeera it was crazy that Russia was attacking cultural sites, including the Museum of Chernobyl. The Museum of Chernobyl. There's a kind of dark symbolism in that target that you don't need to be an analyst to feel. But here's the thing, and this is where the story gets more complex than the headlines suggest. Russia's pretext was a Ukrainian drone strike. Whatever you believe about whether that drone struck a dormitory or a military installation, the sequencing matters. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz condemned the Russian response as a reckless escalation. French President Emmanuel Macron also condemned the strikes, and described Russia's use of the nuclear-capable Oreshnik missile as a sign of both the deadlock in Russia's war effort and a dangerous escalation. Macron's phrasing is interesting. He's calling this simultaneously a sign of weakness and a sign of danger. A country that's winning doesn't need to brandish nuclear-adjacent weapons to make a point. A country that's losing, and knows it, might. At an emergency UN Security Council meeting, the US and the UK called Russia's Oreshnik launch a dangerous and inexplicable escalation at a particularly sensitive moment, precisely when the United States is trying to advance peace negotiations. That word, inexplicable, from the US side. The Trump administration has spent months trying to broker a settlement. They've been talking to Moscow, they've been pressuring Kyiv, they've been trying to thread a needle that, frankly, may not have a thread to put through it. And into that effort, Russia fires its most sophisticated conventional weapon at a civilian population center. Why? That's the question that doesn't have a clean answer. One possibility: Putin is trying to demonstrate to the West that there is no deal he can be forced into, that escalation dominance remains on his side, that any peace deal has to be on Russian terms. Another possibility? The domestic pressure inside Russia, the logistical strain, the economic toll of what Ukraine has been doing to Russia's supply chains. It's deeper than Moscow's information environment allows the Kremlin to acknowledge publicly, and this is a way of asserting strength while the foundation quietly cracks. Because here's what was happening simultaneously. While Russia was firing 690 weapons at Ukraine on the night of May 23rd to 24th, Ukraine was not cowering. Ukraine was striking back, and not where you might expect. On May 24th, drones from the security service of Ukraine's Alpha Special Operations Center struck the Vtorovo fuel transmission station in Russia's Vladimir region, a facility that functions as an essential node rerouting petroleum products to the primary transport and defense hubs surrounding the Russian capital. Read that again. Ukraine hit a fuel station supplying Moscow's airports and surrounding defense infrastructure. Not a frontline position, not an occupied territory. A logistics node inside Russia serving Moscow. Then, on the night of May 25th, Ukrainian forces struck the Belets oil depot near Unecha in Russia's Bryansk region, a facility directly involved in supplying fuel to Russian occupation forces. The Belets depot is located around 60 kilometers from Ukraine's northern border. Bryansk, Vladimir, Crimea, Donetsk, Zaporizhia. Ukraine also struck ammunition depots, logistics warehouses, and Russian military command facilities across multiple regions simultaneously. 5 distinct operational theaters hit in coordinated fashion within 24 to 48 hours of the largest Russian air assault of recent memory. Ukraine didn't retreat into defensive posture. It went after the machinery of Russian war-making itself. This is the strategic logic that's easy to miss when you're focused on the raw horror of 600 drones over Kyiv. Ukraine has made a deliberate, sustained decision to target Russia's logistics network, its fuel supply lines, its ammunition storage, its command infrastructure, its drone production. Attacks on oil and gas energy facilities deep inside Russia have become a near-daily occurrence in 2026, thanks to Ukraine's increasing production and deployment of deep-strike drones. Near daily. Think about the scale of industrial drone production that requires. Think about the planning infrastructure, the intelligence networks, the targeting cycles. Ukraine is not the same military it was in 2022, not remotely, and the effect is measurable. Ukraine hit 10 Russian refineries, knocking out 6 of them, in an escalating deep strike campaign. Fuel is the circulatory system of a military. You cut fuel supply lines, you don't just inconvenience tanks and aircraft, you degrade the entire tempo of operations. You force the Russians to move logistics farther from the front. You stretch supply chains thin. You create friction that accumulates, that compounds, that eventually shows up as operational delays and shortages that no amount of sheer manpower can compensate for. Russia can fire 690 weapons in a night. Can it sustain that rate indefinitely when Ukraine is methodically dismantling the infrastructure behind those weapons? That's the question at the center of this war right now. Not territory, not the front line shifting a few kilometers in Donetsk, but capacity. Production capacity, fuel capacity, air defense sustainability. Who runs out of something critical first? Ukraine has also targeted multiple Russian UAV command posts, drone control centers hit near Borisivka in Belgorod, Voskresenka in Donetsk, and Tyotkino in Kursk region. Attacks on UAV command infrastructure are intended to degrade Russia's reconnaissance and strike drone operations, which have become a major component of battlefield activity. And Ukraine also claims strikes against naval assets at the Novorossiysk naval base in Krasnodar region. The Black Sea Fleet. Even that has not been immune. Now let's zoom out to the geopolitical and economic frame, because this is where it directly touches American interests and American money. EU military aid to Ukraine rose by 67% in 2025. The EU approved a €90 billion loan to Ukraine for budgetary and military support in 2026 and 2027. Europe has, in practical terms, replaced the United States as Ukraine's main donor. That's a seismic shift in the Western alliance architecture that most Americans haven't fully processed. The Trump administration scaled back direct military support, pushed hard for a negotiated settlement, and applied pressure on Kyiv. And the response from Europe was to step into that gap, with money, with weapons commitments, with political solidarity. The responsibility for funding new advanced equipment, including Patriot air defense systems, has shifted from the U.S. to European NATO allies. That matters for American interests in ways that go beyond the war itself. A Europe that has been forced to militarize, to take strategic ownership of its own security, to build defense industrial capacity at scale, that Europe is a different geopolitical partner than the one America has had for the last 80 years. Whether that's ultimately good or bad for the United States is a genuinely open question, but it's a change, an irreversible one. And it's happening right now, accelerated by every Russian missile that falls on a Ukrainian city. Ukraine has also sharply increased its domestic production of weapons, including interceptor drones and ground robots. Kyiv continues to be dependent on the United States for deliveries, via European countries, of anti-ballistic missiles. But the relatively limited impact of Russian missile strikes on Ukraine's ability to fight means that U.S. leverage there may be minimal. Let me be precise about what this is saying. Ukraine's dependency on America has shrunk. The leverage Washington thought it had, the ability to compel Kyiv toward a deal by threatening to withhold support, may simply no longer be what it was. Ukraine built around it. Europe funded around it. And the war continues. Now pair this with a detail from the peace talks context that rarely gets enough attention. The latest round of U.S. brokered talks concluded without a significant breakthrough. While the parties reached near consensus over a ceasefire monitoring mechanism, they remain deadlocked over the key issue of territory. Moscow insists that Ukraine must cede the entire Donbas region, including territories Russia has failed to secure militarily, before fighting can stop. Russia is demanding Ukraine surrender territory it doesn't even fully occupy on the ground. That's not a negotiating position designed to reach an agreement. That's a negotiating position designed to maintain the war. And then Russia fires 690 weapons at Kyiv, including a nuclear-capable hypersonic missile, while those talks are nominally underway. Read the room on that one. Russia is facing the prospect of increased Western backing of Ukraine at the same time that its economy, both due to sanctions and Ukrainian attacks on oil and gas infrastructure, appears on the verge of collapse. On the verge of collapse. That comes from analysts at CSIS, not from Ukrainian propaganda, not from partisan media, but from one of the most sober think tanks in Washington. Here's what the market implications look like, because markets don't ignore this forever. The specific shock of a nuclear-capable weapon being deployed, even without nuclear warheads, shifts the risk premium on European stability. Defense stocks have been moving. European rearmament is not a trend anymore, it's a structural reality. BAE Systems recorded a 14% year-on-year jump in sales and predicted a further increase as Europe bolsters its military capabilities. Every Oreshnik launch is, in a terrible and perverse way, a revenue catalyst for the European and American defense industrial complex. Money is following the fear. But there's another dimension here that has real implications for American consumers and investors. Ukraine is hitting Russian fuel infrastructure hard. Russia supplies energy to parts of the global market. Every oil depot hit in Bryansk, every fuel station taken out in Vladimir, tightens the Russian domestic logistics chain. If this campaign continues at scale, and there's no sign it won't, it eventually pressures Russia's ability to sustain export volumes. That has oil price implications. Quiet ones right now, possibly louder ones ahead. There's also the Oreshnik itself to examine more carefully. The Oreshnik has a range of several thousand kilometers and is capable of carrying a nuclear warhead. According to Moscow, the missile is capable of striking targets across large parts of Europe. Every time Russia deploys this system, this is the third use in combat, with Russia having confirmed each launch separately, it normalizes escalation. It's a psychological operation as much as a military one. It's designed to make European governments hesitate, to make NATO allies recalculate the cost of continued support, to make ordinary people in Warsaw, in Berlin, in Paris, wonder whether their country's support for Ukraine might one day invite this weapon's attention. Does it work? So far, the evidence is it hasn't. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte indicated the alliance could secure an additional $15 billion in 2026, on top of $5 billion allocated in 2025, to sustain Ukraine's military needs. That's $20 billion in a single year from NATO countries, flowing to a war that the Trump administration has tried repeatedly to wind down. The alliance is moving in the opposite direction from what the Oreshnik is supposed to signal. But there's something else worth sitting with. Ukraine's air defenses, while formidable, are not unlimited. Ukrainian air defenses intercepted 549 drones and 55 missiles, but dozens still penetrated defenses, causing significant damage across 40 locations in Kyiv alone, striking residential buildings and critical infrastructure. The math there is uncomfortable. Russia launches 690 weapons. Ukraine intercepts 604 of them, an interception rate most militaries would envy. But the 86 that get through kill people, destroy buildings, hit ministries, strike museums. Against a sufficiently large barrage, even excellent air defense is permeable. Ukraine needs more Patriot batteries, more NASAMS, more interceptor missiles. The production rates in the United States and Europe for these systems are not keeping pace with the consumption rates. That's not a minor logistics note, that's a potential turning point in the war's trajectory. If Ukraine's air defense coverage erodes faster than replacement systems arrive, the calculus shifts. Russian planners know this. Every mass barrage is partly designed to exhaust interceptor stocks as much as to cause direct damage. Which brings us back to a question Americans should be asking directly. What does the United States want the outcome of this war to actually be? Because right now, American policy is neither fully in nor fully out. The Trump administration has pulled back direct military support, following reductions in U.S. military and humanitarian aid. Yet U.S. officials are still attending UN Security Council emergency sessions condemning Russian escalation. The White House is pursuing a peace deal while Russia fires nuclear-capable missiles at Ukrainian cities during the negotiating period. There is a fundamental incoherence here, and it has real-world consequences. Wars fought in a strategic vacuum, where the most powerful potential actor is ambivalent, tend to drag on. They tend to escalate to fill the space that ambivalence creates. And the economic cost of that ambivalence is not abstract. European defense spending is rising at rates that, while necessary for European security, also represent capital pulled away from productive investment. Energy markets carry a risk premium they wouldn't carry in a stable environment. The global supply chain disruptions that a major escalation in this war would cause, if, for instance, an Oreshnik were to accidentally or intentionally strike a NATO-adjacent asset, are incalculable. We're not there, but the gap between where we are and where that scenario begins has narrowed in the last 5 days. There's a version of this story where Putin's use of the Oreshnik is the last gasp of a regime under genuine economic strain, trying to signal strength it doesn't have, trying to intimidate a Western coalition that has already absorbed multiple such signals and kept going. Macron's description of the Oreshnik launch as a sign of the deadlock in Russia's war effort fits that reading. A military that is winning does not deploy its most frightening weapon against a city of 200,000 civilians. It doesn't need to. But there's another version where this is a deliberate, calibrated test of Western resolve. At a moment when American leadership is distracted, European unity is under stress, and Ukraine is dependent on a support architecture that is being actively renegotiated in real time. A test to see if the line really moves when the weapon deployed is nuclear adjacent. A test to establish a new precedent, that the Oreshnik is a usable tool, not a last resort. Each use makes the next use easier to justify. We don't know which version is true. Anyone who tells you they do is selling something. What we know is what happened. Russia launched 90 missiles and 600 drones. One of them was an Oreshnik. It hit a city of 200,000 people. And Ukraine, within hours, was hitting fuel depots inside Russia, targeting the pipeline that feeds Moscow's airports, striking ammunition stores across 5 regions simultaneously. This is not a conflict winding down toward a negotiated peace. This is a conflict escalating in both directions at once. Deeper Russian strikes, deeper Ukrainian counterstrikes, while diplomats talk and the world watches to see which side's logistics break first. Ukraine's own campaign against Russia is starting to bear fruit, according to foreign policy. The deep strike drone economy Ukraine has built, the near-daily hits on refineries, fuel nodes, ammo depots, is a different kind of warfare than what most people picture when they think of this conflict. It's slow, methodical, infrastructural. It's designed not to win a battle, but to degrade an entire war machine's ability to function over time. And it may be working. Which is why Russia is firing 690 weapons in a single night. Because something is working on the other side, and brute force air assault is the only lever left to pull that doesn't cross the nuclear threshold. The question that nobody can answer right now, the one that keeps serious analysts up at night, is whether Putin is willing to hold that line indefinitely. Whether the Oreshnik remains a conventional weapon with nuclear-capable status as a deterrent backdrop, or whether continued Ukrainian success in degrading Russian logistics, continued European support, continued isolation of the Russian economy, eventually pushes decision-making in Moscow toward a place none of us wants to contemplate. That's not a prediction. That's a variable. And right now, it remains unresolved, deliberately, dangerously so. What you're watching in this war is no longer a territorial contest. It's a race between Russia's ability to absorb economic and logistical degradation and Ukraine's ability to sustain the deep strike campaign long enough to make the cost of continuing prohibitive. The Oreshnik is Russia's loudest argument that it can endure. The Belets depot burning in Bryansk at 3 a.m. The Vtorovo fuel station offline. The ammunition stores in Crimea struck while Kyiv was still clearing rubble. Those are Ukraine's quieter counter-argument. One side is screaming, the other is methodically cutting the wires. The real question isn't who fires the bigger weapon, it's who runs out of something they can't replace. This is Professor David. I'll see you in the next one.